reference collection. What I'm going to do here in just a moment is I'm going to switch over to reviewer just to walk you through what a common kind of reference collection model might look like. Before I do that, though, just to kind of set the stage just a little bit on the concept behind it. So, traditionally speaking, with all scholarships, if you're collecting references, many times the applicants will procrastinate, and that's in general, right? They're always going to wait to the very last minute. That typically also means that the person writing the reference for them is going to be asked at the very last minute. So they're already working, I guess, against the eight ball. They're behind the gun, and so they're going to be rushing through this and maybe not putting forth the effort that the applicants desire. But if anybody on this call today has ever written a reference, like quite frankly, it's a bit challenging because you're asked at the last minute to sit down from scratch and write a full-blown letter. Now, many times references might have like a template that they always work off of. They're just kind of changing out names. But now we lose the purpose of the reference, right? Where's the personal kind of storytelling and the impact that comes with it? They're also a barrier for the references because for many of you, they may be having to write these offline. They're kind of off in their own world doing things. You have got no idea like what the progress is of them. Not even the applicants know if their references have been submitted or not. And then they're going to submit it to you through email and attachments, and you got to figure out like who does this reference belong to. You got to merge them together. We're going to get more into like the compliance things later on, but like then how do you redact the information? So all these challenges come into play. So the trend shift that we're starting to see, and this is becoming a really core component to reviewer, is avoiding reference letters. So number one is we want the references to be submitted directly from the source themselves. I've never seen a negative written reference, but with that said, they are still typically a very private process. So the goal here is to actually have the references submit to you directly their reference, but then instead of doing our reference letter, why don't we do a one or two things or a combination of both? And that's called a reference template. So what are the 3 to 5 things that you want the references to talk about? And then instead of filling out a letter, they just answer those 3 to 5 things. You also may be able to map that back to like a scorecard concept where, answer these 3 questions about the candidate, but then also on a scale of 1 to 5, rank them on these kind of 4 characteristics, right? That make up the ideal scholarship applicant to your organization. So that way, when you go to sit down to do an actual review, judging, selection process, the data is now very consistent amongst all of your candidates. You're actually comparing apples to apples. You're not going to have that one reference writer who's just significantly better writer than another person, which is more of a reflection on them as the writer than the applicant themselves. It also will significantly lower the barrier for your references, hopefully ensuring that they get into the system or whatever tool that you're using very early on, and you're not having to do a bunch of follow-ups or even worse, having an applicant get disqualified for not having the deliverables because it really wasn't even on them to begin with, it was on the reference. So there's a lot of benefits behind kind of transitioning to this model. But now I hear what you're thinking is 2 things. One is how do we actually do that? And then two, if we have these references being submitted directly from the source, how on earth are you going to track that? Because you have to know how many outstanding references were requested, what their progress was, and have some type of reminder system in place, both from you as an organization, but then also from an applicant's perspective to ensure that they come through. So with all that said, let's actually look at what an ideal reference process would look like in a platform like Reviewer. So I'm going to really start at a high level with the submission process because that's really where it all happens. So at least in a platform like us, the applicants create their accounts, they come into the tool, and they fill out their scholarship application. Just to kind of tease it a little bit, your applications typically consist of 3 to 4 key components. Who are you? Tell us more about your academics. The other 2 pieces I'm going to talk about are kind of a foreshadowing and a teaser to the review process later on. At this point in time, everybody gets 4.0s. Everybody gets 4.3 out nowadays. So how do you start to allow the applicants to kind of differentiate themselves from other candidates? So as I kind of scroll through here, we'll avoid the reference for now. We'll come back to that. So you want to ask things like GPA, information about them. You get into things like file uploads or transcripts. And then they'll start to ask them more things about like their personal achievements. Let's talk more about like their volunteer and their community impact, right? Things that are outside of the classroom or outside of the academic world. Now, I totally understand that many scholarships are need-based and analysis-based. That's totally fine. But let's also kind of try to incorporate some of these other components to your forms. I mentioned AI content detection here a little bit earlier on. That's the next piece that we're going to talk about. But as you can see here, that's really the core differentiator between your candidates is their storytelling and their personal impact statements and their essays. So let's empower them to be able to save, log out, come back later, and actually put thoughtful content on paper. The goal of your entire submission process has to be to empower applicants to write the best application as humanly possible, set them up for success by lowering any potential barriers. I don't want to see people having to do fillable PDFs. I don't want them to be using other tools that they have to export, download, and send back to you guys. It has to be kind of comprehensive into one centralized hub. Things like file uploads and components, videos, FAFSA, whatever it might be, the ability to collect them in one place, e-signatures. But really what I want to talk about here is that reference. So let's go back to that. So in a perfect environment, what's going to end up happening is in your submission process, we want to ask very early on who the references are. So the applicant's going to put in the first name, the last name, and the email of whoever's writing the reference. The reason why we want to ask this early on is it's actually going to trigger a notification to go to that reference. And so if we ask early on, we know that notification goes out very early on in the process. This allows ample time for the reference to get their work done, but also allows the applicants to proceed on with the rest of their scholarship application and not get bogged down or hung up on another component that they're not quite ready for yet. Again, even though they can say they can log out, they can come back later. If we have multiple people contributing to their profile, let's get it in their hands early. So in this use case, we got people like Dwight here. Dwight's going to get some type of email notification that's going to say, hey, Dwight, you've been asked to write a reference on behalf of Michael for this year's scholarship program. Here's some of the characteristics that we're looking for. Here's some more background on us. Click here to actually submit your reference. Now, this is where things completely change. So in this use case, Dwight, the reference writer, clicks on the link within that email, and it brings Dwight directly to what I call that reference template. Now, again, I would love to see this broken into two pieces. This one only has one of those elements where, it's going to tell them exactly who it's for, who are you. And then let's do three things or two things. One, it's like, what are the three kind of essay prompts you want the reference to talk about? Again, lower the barrier. There's reading the question and they're typing in their answer. And then two is if you do want to leverage some type of a score sheet that aligns with both the application form or your own personal score sheets for the applicant, what's their leadership capability, what's their community impact, right? All these things that you might be looking for, have them fill out a very simple like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 scale. This example might be a bit overkill, but at the end of the day, whenever we go to review these applicants, every single applicant has the same data associated with them. In fact, using a tool like Reviewer, we can actually tabulate some of these reference results and then automatically add it to like your review and judging team scorecards. So that way it merges all of them for a final selection. Again, no right or wrong way of doing that, but there's some cool things that we can do. Now, with that said, if you do still want to offer letters, by all means, go ahead. You can make it optional, so that way it's just more so to have on file. It's up to you. But you have to be able to make sure that you can collect all of that in one spot. So reference comes in, they fill this out. What happens next? So from an operation perspective, on your dashboards, we're not going to get deep into this today, is actually going to show you visibility on like how many outstanding references we have. And then you can start to really dive into who they are, how far have they made it, their progress percentages. Leverage automation to send them auto email reminders. So dear Dwight, we see that you've been requested to write a reference on behalf of Michael. It's due in 3 days, right? And so automatically have that happen on a trigger. But then from Michael's perspective, he can come back in or she can come back into Reviewer, see outstanding references. They can't see the actual content of it, but they can see if it's been done or not. That way they can also have some type of self-ownership and do their own follow-ups for accountability. So great, we've got these notifications that went out, the reference filled it out. You guys have an idea of what's happening, how many are outstanding, where they're at. How do you physically look at those references? So whenever you come into the system, you're actually going to see a list of those references that came in. So in this use case, I've got two of them, one from Dwight, one from Toby. If I then come over to the side and press on the view button, I can actually open the reference up and it'll embed it right in our system. So you never have to actually download or export or leave the system. You can view all of it in one centralized hub. So again, in my opinion, kind of a total game changer of how references are being collected. But more holistically speaking, even without a tool like Reviewer, I think we have to shift away from letters and move more towards this template-based process. Again, the chat's open, so any insights or comments or thoughts, if you guys are already doing this, that's great. Let me know. I'd love to hear that. Toss it in the chat. All right. So, oh yeah, one last thing too to show you. If you are still doing reference files, one thing we have to avoid, since we are living in a very mobile environment nowadays, is that you have to be able to physically view the reference right in the system like a reviewer, not download those PDFs or those Word documents and find other tools to access it and then come back into our tool.